Hi everyone, my name is Monica Brown. Welcome to the How to Write Great College Essays seminar. Wanted to start by just giving you a little bit of information about me. So I work now as an independent college counselor for a company called CollegeWise. Families will hire us to work one-on-one with their students, and we help students on everything from writing essays to putting together college lists to, strategy behind the application itself and all of that. So before I did this job, I was an admissions officer for 7 years. So I worked for 3 years at Wellesley College, and I was, reading applications and helping to decide who got admitted. And then I worked at Harvard for 4 years doing the same thing as an admissions officer. And I really loved it. I've probably read about at least 10,000 essays in my time as an admissions officer. So have a good idea of, what's going to stand out in the process. What is the sort of essay that admissions officers have read a million times? And so that's sort of what I'm going to try to help you with today, just give you some tips on how to write an essay that really stands out in the process. All right, so wanted to just, first thing you should be thinking about when you're writing this essay. Well, first thing you should know is that the essay is just one component, one part of the application. So especially if you're applying to schools that have a holistic review, and that means that they're looking at your grades, your test scores, your extracurriculars. They're also looking at your essay. I mean, it'll just be one of the many components. So sometimes students will say, well, is this the most important thing, or what is the most important thing? This is just one of the components. It's really a chance for you to let the admissions officers know who you are. So the application itself should speak for your academics. They'll be able to know if you can handle the work academically by looking at your grades, your transcript, your test scores. After that, so, let's say at Harvard, we would look at your grades, we'd look at your test scores, and we'd say, okay, yeah, they could do the work here academically, we believe. Now, what else is there to them? What kind of student would this be? What kind of classmate would this be? What kind of roommate would this be? What's the student's personality like? What's the student's character like? That's what we'd be pulling from the essays. So obviously, I said I read at least 10,000 essays, so I put this picture up of Tina Fey in the movie Admissions. I don't know if anyone of you got to see it, and not to say, I mean, I don't know how accurate it was. I guess some parts of it were, but this picture really reminds me of my days reading essays, just feeling overwhelmed. So around this time of year, that's what admissions officers are doing. They are reading applications and reading essay after essay after essay. And, I got to stay home and read from home, which was nice because living in Boston with their awful weather right now, it was kind of nice to not be able to have to go into the office. So I'd read from home, I'd wake up and I'd start reading. I'd go to sleep at like 2 a.m. and just keep reading. So yeah, you have to think about these people reading your applications, reading thousands of essays, and you want to make sure that your essay is not one of those that's going to make them feel like, oh my gosh, I can't go on. Like if I read another essay like this, I'm going to just lose it. You want to be the one that has that essay that's different and refreshing and fun and just very you. That's the way it should be. But so these admissions officers, just to give you an idea, because even at Harvard, people think, oh, it's all a bunch of older men in like smoking jackets and pipes, but that's not the way it is. The average age of admissions officers is around 25. And so a lot of these people are recent grads themselves of the same college that they're reading for. And so just so you know, they're closer in age to high school students than they are to, your parents or your teachers. So just keeping that in mind too. I'm going to save time at the end for some questions. I see that there is a question or are some questions now, but I'm just going to save time at the very end to answer your questions. So if you can just hold off on that, that would be great. So this workshop, I'm going to share 4 tips with you to help you write college essays that will help you stand out in the college admissions process. I was saying these people are reading so many essays. You want to make sure that you're not doing what everyone else is doing. So the first tip I feel like is the most important tip, and it's don't try to impress the admissions officers. Just be honest. This is where I feel like most students get tripped up. They think I'm applying to a school where you know, if it's a competitive process where these people must be really smart. I have to show them that I'm really smart too. So I'm going to write about that club that I started, or I'm going to use all of the big words that I know or that I can think of, pull out the thesaurus. And those were the essays that tended to sound boring, that just tended to sound like everyone else's. So I'll give you an example of an essay that really stood out to me. Well, some examples. So I had a student who, while I was an admissions officer, who wrote her essay about being an ice cream scooper, working as an ice cream scooper over the summer. And it was very simple. It's not like she had an internship at a science lab and she was doing research with a professor, which, you know, cool if you're doing that, that's a good thing. But for her, it was just really simple. I had this job, this is what it taught me, this is what I learned about the people in my community through this job and the people I was meeting, and we just felt like this tells us so much about who she is. She just seems like a really good person. Like we would love to have her on campus. And then I worked with a student this past year, and I remember meeting with him and his mom, and we were talking about ideas for his essay. And he said, well, I have an idea. I started this club, and I want to write about that. And his mom said, yeah, she thought that was a really good idea. And, you know, it was impressive. But the student and I talked more, and I said, I feel like that would be a good topic. But I feel like what makes you different or interesting to me is your relationship with your mom. So he had a single mom. And every time they'd come into my office to talk to me, I would just notice the way that they would interact with each other. Like she would tell him what to do sometimes, and I could tell he was annoyed, but he was so sweet about it. And I just thought, like, that's not what a typical teenage boy would do. And for me, I just thought, like, that's really sweet. They have a really sweet relationship. And I thought that was special about him. So I said, I have this idea, like, I think you should write your essay about you and your mom. So we talked more about it, and he had all of these stories, like, oh yeah, I remember when I was a kid, my mom would make me go to this festival, and they had salsa dancing, and she would make me dance with her, and I was so embarrassed, but she loved to do it, and so I would do it for her. But I remember being so embarrassed, and he had a bunch of stories like that. And he ended up writing this essay, and his mom read it and said, I like it, it's really nice, but I don't think that this is impressive enough. It's just about me. It's like about us, our relationship. And I said, you know, it doesn't have to be impressive. They're going to love this essay, trust me. And I remember talking to the admissions officer after that. So he was admitted to Harvard, this student. And I remember talking to the admissions officer who admitted him after the fact, and just saying, you know, you admitted a few of my students this year. I'm really excited. And he said, oh yeah, who? And I told him their names, and he said, I remember that kid. He's the kid who wrote that lovely essay about his mom. But again, you know, it wasn't like, okay, let me sit at my computer and think about what the most impressive thing I've done in high school is so that I can, you know, show them that I'm really smart or that I'm really accomplished or that I'm a leader. It was just a simple story about his relationship with his mom, and people loved it. I mean, it was one of those things when you finish reading it, you're like, this is a good kid. We have to have this kid on campus. And that really simply, like, that's what you want them to feel. They should feel like you're just a nice kid. They want to have you around. Of course, I said you have to sort of pass those academic hurdles first. So after that, after they feel like you can do the work here academically, then they're looking for your personality. Okay, so that's the first tip. The second tip is to own your stories. So what does that mean? Well, just add as much detail as you can. So I have students who are like, okay, so I have to write this essay that no one else has written ever, and like, how am I going to ever do that? That's impossible. So if I write about community service, everyone else is going to write about that probably. And yeah, that's probably true. A lot of people are going to write about community service. So if you choose to do that, or if you choose to write about athletics or football or something like that, what you're going to have to do is just inject as much detail as you can to really make it your own. So when you finish reading that essay, you have to ask yourself, could anybody else have written this? And if someone else could have written it, then it's probably not a good idea to choose that topic. Or if somebody else could have written it, you need to go back and really put in some more detail. So I'm going to give you an example of one of our students. Let me just look down here at my notes real quick. Okay, so we had a student who came to us, and he wanted to write about playing in the orchestra. And so he came with us with a rough draft and said, all right, so here's my essay. This was just the first paragraph. So I'm going to read it to you. And then I'm going to read you the sort of modified version because we said this just doesn't have enough detail in it. So he said, I was extremely nervous before the orchestra started playing. However, I knew that this was an important performance and that I needed to play well. I took a deep breath, relaxed, and did my best to concentrate. And I read that and I was like, oh my gosh, I've read a million essays that start like that. Whether it's like the swimmer at the starting block or, you know, the football player right before the big game or whatever it is. It's just a common kind of way to start an essay. So we just went back and said, okay, just put more detail into it. I want to know more about this. What was it like? Who was there? What were you looking at? So this is what he came back with modified. I was sitting there on the stage with my violin resting on my shoulder, and I was sure I'd never been that nervous. I looked out into the crowd of 200 people, and somehow I found my dad. He was holding his video camera, the same camera that's been in our family since I was 10. My dad loves recording everything I do with that video camera. It's the same camera he used to record my first home run in Little League and my entrance on stage in my first school play. And he goes on, but you can see those little details really let you picture what his family is like, what his relationship with his dad is like. There were 200 people there, he says, so you can really start to think about, wow, that was a big crowd. So it just really paints a nice picture in your mind that separates it from maybe other students who would be writing about similar stories about, you know, they were also in the orchestra about to play or they were at a recital about to play. This really separates it. So that's what I mean by owning your story, adding more details. I had a student that I worked with last year, and he told me that he wanted to write his essay about Boy Scouts. And I was like, oh no, I've read a million essays about Boy Scouts. Like, what is this going to be like? I mean, let's talk it through. If it's going to be the same old kind of story about, I don't know, like a community service project that you did and how it taught you to appreciate helping people, and you're so happy that you did it, and the leadership skills that you learned. If it's going to be like that, maybe not. But let's talk it through. And so he talks to me about like how his experience with Boy Scouts is different than what you might expect from the typical Boy Scout group or troop. And so this is his essay. I wanted to just like share you a little piece of what he wrote because I felt like, okay, this is not like every other Boy Scout essay I've read. This is different because he is injecting all of these details and he's really making it his own. So he starts with saying, with writing, I've only pulled one all-nighter in my life. It was not to study or to party, but to canoe through the U.S.-Canada boundary waters. Through scouting, I've hiked 102 miles in the mountains of New Mexico, zip-lined over lakes, explored subterranean caves, and he keeps going on, but the idea is, this love for adventure, and you get to know him over the story that he tells about canoeing with his friends out there in the wild and what he appreciated about that. And so if you're thinking, well, I have to choose a topic that no one else is going to write about. You don't. A lot of kids write about Boy Scouts, but this student did it in a way that really made it his own story. So again, just adding all of those little details that help the reader picture it are going to help to set you apart. Okay, so the third tip is don't repeat information from the rest of your application. So imagine they have your application, it has a list of your extracurricular activities, they have your grades and your test scores. Let's say, in your extracurriculars list, you write that you are in band and that you play football. Maybe you don't want to write your essay about that. Maybe you want to share new information just so that they learn something different about you. So I'll give you an example because there are exceptions, but I'll give you an example of sharing something new. So we had a student who had a lot of work at home. So he lived with his grandma, and he told me that whenever he'd come home after school, and he had a busy day at school and he played tennis, when he got home from school, that he had a bunch of chores to do. And this was nowhere in his application. He didn't write it down as an extracurricular, chores, grandma chores or something like that. But obviously it took up a lot of his time. So I started asking him about that. What do you do? Like, what does your grandma make you do? And he said, I have to vacuum, I wash dishes, I sweep, sometimes I do laundry. And I was like, well, that's a lot to do. And again, for a teenage boy, you don't often see them vacuuming or read about them doing dishes. And again, I was talking to him about, like, I'm sure this is not the most fun thing. I'm sure this, like, you're tired when you get home. And he said, well, yeah, but I know that I'm helping out my grandma. I really like doing that. And, it makes me feel good that I can help her out in some way. And again, just, you get the feeling like this is just a good kid. This is just a nice guy. And so I told him, maybe you should write your essay about that. Again, like just letting admissions officers know that you have all of these responsibilities, you're doing all of these activities, and then when you get home, you have additional things to do. So maybe this takes away a little time from, doing another extracurricular activity, or taking another challenging class that you could have taken, because you have these responsibilities. It just adds another dimension. They're really just trying to figure out who you are, where you're coming from. And so that's just an example of sharing new information with them that's not anywhere on the application. But in some cases you say, well, I'm going to list band and football on my extracurricular section, but I want to write about it. Okay, you can do that. You can repeat information, but you have to make sure that you're sharing something new. So for using that example, I imagine, because I live in Texas, that band and football, they happen at the same time, so it must be hard to do. If I read that in your extracurricular section, band and football, I'd be like, that must be hard to do. That must take up a lot of time. But I don't really know what that's like unless you write about it. So we had a student who wrote about what it was like running from band practice to football, and during the games, like playing at halftime with his football jersey on, and marching on the field, and then running back into the locker room. And when I read that, I felt like, okay, now I get it. Whoa, this is really hard. So the tip is don't repeat information from the rest of your application. Try to share something new. But then, of course, if you do want to repeat information, make sure that you're sharing something new with the admissions officers that they think, I never would have thought of it that way, or I didn't realize it was that hard. Okay, the last tip is your essays should sound like you. This is where a lot of students would get tripped up. So the first 3 essays were about choosing your story. And this essay is about how you should go about writing your story. So a lot of times we'd get students who, again, kind of like the first tip where don't try to impress the admissions officers, they were thinking, I have to write maybe sort of like I would write a paper for English class. It's got to be a bit formal. It can't have like a lot of my personality in it. There has to be some sort of distance from me to this essay, but that's not the way it should be. So I'm going to give you some examples of this because, again, I feel like this is where a lot of students get tripped up and where some essays can tend to sound really boring. So we had a student who was writing about, well, he wanted to write about his chemistry class, how he started taking it, didn't do really well, and decided that he was going to kind of drop out of it. So this is how he started his essay. Now, this is just the first paragraph. Throughout our lives, we're often forced to confront challenges. Oftentimes, we're able to learn the most valuable lessons from challenges that we successfully overcome. I found this to be the case when I chose to enroll in AP Chemistry my junior year. In spite of my best efforts, I consistently struggled with chemistry, but I persevered, and I'm very thankful that I did, as I successfully completed the course and proved to myself that I can finish where I start. Now, that's not bad. That's well written. It's really not a bad essay or a start to an essay, but we just felt like, we know you so well, this doesn't sound like you. Like when I talk to you about your chemistry class and you tell me how it went, this is not, like, you don't use these words when you're talking to me. This is not how you sound. So he said, go back, rewrite this, and make it sound like you, just like you're telling me the story. So he rewrites it, and this is how it comes out. In the middle of my junior year, chemistry and I were having irreconcilable differences. The divorce was going to get ugly. really ugly. I don't know why, but no matter how many days I spent after school while my teacher, Mr. Chapman, patiently tried to help me, I just couldn't get it. In fact, after finishing the class, pretty much the only thing I'm sure about when it comes to chemistry is that I could never be a chemist. Believe me, that's good news for the scientific community. Again, reading this, we were like, this is so you. This sounds like you. These essays are not, they shouldn't have an academic tone. The personal statement essay that what I'm talking about is it's the main essay that everyone needs to write for their application, for college application. The tone shouldn't be an academic tone. It shouldn't be too informal either. So a good middle ground would be think about how you might explain a story to maybe a favorite teacher, a teacher who you have a good relationship with. You wouldn't be so formal, but you wouldn't also be so informal as though you were talking to your friends. So good middle ground is think about a favorite teacher or an uncle who you have, a good relationship with and respect for. How would you share that story? Yeah, this is the thing where, again, these essays where you're trying to sound like something that you're not because you feel that's what they want to hear, they tend to sound really boring. So these tips really, let's just review them really quickly. So the first one is don't try to impress the admissions officers, just be honest. Again, students sit at their computer and they think, I have to think of the most impressive thing that I've done and write about that, because I have to show them that I'm really smart and that I'd be able to handle the work at the school. But again, the essay should really talk about or speak to your personality and who you are. The application itself, your grades, your transcript, your test scores will speak to whether or not you can handle the work there academically. So don't try to impress them. Just be honest. It's so cliche, right? Just be yourself, but it's true. Those are the kids who really stood out to me when I was reading thousands of essays. I'd get to somebody who their tone was a bit more casual. They were okay with, making fun of themselves or, just being like, this is me and this is the way I am and take it or leave it kind of thing. And we really responded well to those kids. The next one is own your story. Again, just making sure to inject as much detail as you can so that no one else could have told this story. So in thinking back to that orchestra example where you can picture how many people were in the audience, that dad was there videotaping the whole thing and that the video camera is the same one that he used for Little League games and things like that. Those are elements of the story that you'll remember. So I didn't always remember like the whole story, the whole essay that a student wrote, but certain things to me would pop out, like the student who wrote about Britney Spears. I don't remember that essay, but I remember we had a student apply to Harvard who wrote his essay about Britney Spears, and I was like, I don't know if this essay is going to work out, but it was actually a really well done essay, and I can't even tell you exactly what it was about, but I remember that. That's just a detail that really stands out to me where I think, yeah, oh yeah, that essay. Or the kid who wrote that he loved cooking, and it was about how he was like making tacos one day, and like I don't remember the whole story, but I remember that little thing. Another student wrote about a hobby that he had, and he really loved tying knots. So he was in Boy Scouts, and he liked tying knots, and so he lived by the ocean. And so he found out that there was nautical knot tying. And so I didn't even know what this was. I had to Google it. But apparently, you can get ropes and you tie them into intricate knots to create decorative things for usually things on boats, like a bell pull. They'll create these intricate knots for that. They create bags for sailors. Anyway, he loved doing this. And, it could have been another story again about Boy Scouts or about a hobby, but he really put all of these details in. Like he said, I really became obsessed with nautical knot tying. I found this conference for nautical knot tying that wasn't too far from where I lived, and everyone there was like 80 years old, and I was the only kid there, but I didn't care. I went and I loved it, and I learned all of these new things. And, again, those are little details that you really remember that stick with me. Like, I don't even know. I read that essay years ago, and I still remember those little details. The third one, don't repeat information from the rest of your application. We just talked about that. If you want to repeat information, make sure that it's something new that they might not have been able to guess or infer from your extracurricular list, for example. And the last thing is your essays should sound like you. Again, you don't want it to be very stiff. You don't want it to sound boring. You don't want it to be very formal. I had a student who came to me and said, I have an essay that I want you to review. My English teacher looked over this essay like 20 times. We've edited it. It's fine. I mean, but I want to get your opinion on it. And so I read it and I was like, well, this is really well written, but it's so boring. Again, it was about this conference that he started at school, which was impressive, but the way that he wrote about it, it didn't set him apart. I just felt like I've read this so many times. So we went back and we started thinking about other ideas for an essay. And I mean, we came up with something totally different where I remember we talked about it, we brainstormed ideas for it. And he said, oh yeah, this is it. Like, this is what I want to write about. He went home, he emailed me like 20 minutes later and said, here's my essay. It just flowed out of me. Like, this is it. And that's how it should feel when you're writing these essays. It shouldn't feel like this tortured thing that you're editing 20 times, that in the end doesn't even sound like you, that is very formal, that is trying to be impressive. It should just be a did we get disconnected? I'm sorry about that. So I was just saying that the last thing is sound like you. Sorry about that. Okay, so what I want to do now is go to questions. I know that you guys must have, oh, well, I put Beyonce and Jay-Z here because it really is about having confidence when you're writing these essays. So those students who are like, I have to sound impressive, okay, they'll come to me and say, what do you think they want to hear? Like, here's the prompt. What do you think they want to hear about? What do you think they're trying to get at with this? And it's like, no, you're approaching it the wrong way. Again, you have to just be like, this is me, this is who I am, I'm proud of who I am, all my quirky, nerdy, weird, things about me. If you like it, great. If not, maybe we're not the right fit. So yeah, you just have to have this confidence about you, like Beyonce and Jay-Z. This is me. Those are the kids who really stand out the most. Okay, so I do see we have some questions. I'm going to go to the question box and see what we have. Okay, do you recommend sending in an essay even if the college doesn't require you to? Some colleges don't require you to send in an essay. So I think that it could be good because they get to know, it's another way for them to get to know you. Sometimes colleges that don't require essays in the application process, well, so let me step back. The reason that some schools won't require essays is because they're doing their admissions process really just by the numbers. So they're looking at your grades, they're looking at your test scores, and they have a little chart that they go to. Okay, you have this GPA, you have these test scores, you're in. Those are the schools that generally don't require essays. But yeah, I mean, if they're open to accepting essays, I would say sure. If you've already written one up for other colleges and you feel happy and confident about it, why not? I would say do it. And just something else to know is that those schools that don't require essays sometimes will require essays for merit scholarships. So, just keep that in mind if you're interested in applying for merit scholarships. Just look around the website and see, okay, they don't require an essay, but let me see if they require an essay for a merit scholarship. And if they do, then, okay, I already have an essay that I wrote, and then, I'll submit that. Okay. How many papers do you typically have to write in freshman composition? I mean, that's a good question, but yeah, it probably would depend on the college. I was a freshman advisor at Harvard, and I know that we had a couple different sort of freshman writing classes, and you would, when you got to the college, in the early fall, you'd take a test to determine which class that you would be in. And I know one was a bit more intensive if they felt like you needed a bit more writing help, and another one was a bit more advanced. And so even within those classes, the number of papers may have varied, but in general, writing well is something that their colleges are really looking for. And so, yeah, I mean, I would expect that you're going to be doing probably a lot of writing in college. I don't have an exact number, but yeah, you'll have to do a good bit of writing in college. Okay, how do I get across to admissions that my GPA is not an accurate reflection on my work ethic? I had to work to support my mom through sophomore year, and my GPA suffered. I want to be successful, and I'm open to growth. I want them to see that I'm a leader. What do I do? Okay, so if your GPA, if you feel it's not an accurate reflection of who you are, I wouldn't choose to write your essay necessarily about that. So I wouldn't have an essay that's just, my GPA isn't what it should be. Let me explain to you why. I might save something like that for the additional information section of the Common Application. So there's a little section called additional information. In there, maybe you write a paragraph that's not blaming anybody or that's not complaining, but just very matter-of-factly, my GPA in junior year dipped. Here's what was going on. I just wanted to let you know so you have an understanding of just everything that was going on in my life at the time. And then choose your essay to write about something else. So you just don't want it to turn into, kind of complaining or blaming anybody. But I do think that they should know about the things that are going on in your life if you feel comfortable telling them, so that they have a better understanding of how that might be affecting your grades or your participation in extracurricular activities. Okay, another question is, don't we want to impress the admissions officers to stand out? Yes. But as I was saying, the things that are going to impress them initially, so when I was reading applications at Harvard, I mentioned the first thing I would do is look at the transcript, look at the grades, look at the test scores, and then I'd be like, okay, this student can do the work here academically. For me, that was sort of the part where you'd impress us in terms of academics. But then tons of kids had perfect SAT scores and perfect GPAs who applied to Harvard. I mean, so what? Big deal. You have a perfect test score, okay. What else is there to you? That's where you are impressing the admissions officers with who you are, but you're not going about it in a very stiff, formal way that doesn't sound like you. You're really, just as I was saying, you're just being who you are, and that's impressive in itself. Like, this kid has so much confidence in himself to talk to me about his geeky hobby. Like, he doesn't care what people think about it. He's just like, I'm going to own this. That's impressive to me. So your numbers will be impressive to them right off the bat, and then your essay will be impressive, but not in the way that you feel it should be, with big words and let me tell you about this club that I started. More of just, I'm just showing you who I am, being honest with who I am. How much information is too much? I've read people writing essays about being gay or struggles with depression. Is this getting too intimate? Yeah, this is a good question. This is really, you want to feel comfortable writing this essay. You want to feel like I'm being who I am. But yeah, you don't want the admissions officers to feel like, is this student okay? So let's say writing about depression. I read some essays where students wrote about depression where we still felt like, could the student still be depressed? I don't know if the student is quite okay yet. And then I read some essays where the student wrote about being depressed, where you get to the end of it and feel like, wow, this student really turned things around. I can see from this essay that it's night and day, like he is not in that place anymore. Good for him. So it's really all in the way that you portray it, all in the way that you write about it. So yeah, it's something that I would just make sure that if you're choosing to write about a topic like that, you're letting someone else read it, a guidance counselor, a teacher, somebody who you trust, and asking, if you read this, let's say if it's about depression, in the end, like, what would you think about me? Do you feel like I've gotten over this. You don't want the college to feel like, well, Harvard is really challenging. I don't know if he'll be up for the challenge of all of this stress, knowing that, I don't think he's quite over this depression. I don't know if this would be a good fit. So it's up to you whether or not you choose to write about that. But again, it's all in the way that you present it. And do you feel like you're kind of in a good place now? You don't want it to be, again, like whining or complaining or anything like that. You want to show like, I went through this struggle, I'm above it now, or I'm better now, this is what I learned from it. Okay, is it an end-all be-all to not repeat information from the rest of your application? Or can you elaborate on a life-changing event from one of your extracurriculars? Yes, so I mentioned you can repeat information if you'd like to, but again, like you were saying, can I elaborate on a life-changing event from one of my extracurriculars? Yes, if it's something, you listed the extracurricular, but you want to write about something really unique to that extracurricular, a life-changing event, yes, go for it. You can do that. No, it's not a be-all, end-all. It's just a suggestion. Is it advisable to do optional essays? If you feel like you're going to be sharing something that, again, that maybe is nowhere else in your application, that you feel this is really important to me, or this is really important, I feel they should know this about me, then go ahead and write that optional essay. If it's, let's say you had a couple of things that you were thinking about writing about, but you decided to go with one thing and you felt like, man, but I really wish they would know this other thing about me. That optional essay could come into play there, where you feel like, okay, I'm going to share this other thing that I really want them to know about me. If you feel like, I feel like I explained pretty well everything there is to know about me in this application, you don't need to do the optional essay. At Harvard, we had an optional essay, and if the students didn't do it, I mean, that was totally okay with us. We already had enough essays to read anyway. If we felt like it's not really adding anything new or different, it didn't really make a difference. But sometimes you'd get an optional essay where you were like, whoa, I'm so glad I know this. I'm so glad the student wrote about this. I mean, this was nowhere else in the application. This is really cool, or this is really interesting. So again, if you're feeling like it's something new and different that's nowhere else in the application, then yeah, do the optional essay. If you're like, I'm good, everything about me is sort of in this application, then don't feel pressured to do it. Do we mention the major or subject matter interest in the essay? So that's a good question. There are some schools, let's say you're applying to the School of Engineering somewhere at a certain college. They'll usually ask you to explain your interest in engineering. Aside from your personal essay, they'll say, okay, write an additional essay about why you're interested in majoring in engineering. And then that's where that comes into play. So you don't need to mention the thing that you want to major in or the thing that you want to study in your personal essay. Usually there's space to do that in supplemental essays that the school requires. You don't have to do that, but if you're really like, I'm all about English, I love reading, I do it on my spare time, like I'm on the literary criticism team, and you want to write about how you want to study that in college too, I mean, that's fine. That tells them a lot about your interest and who you are, but you don't have to do that. How should we approach talking about a traumatic negative event that really shaped us and made us a better person? So I kind of mentioned this before. It's really all in the way that you write about it, where you want to talk about, you want to be matter of fact about the situation, and at the end, yeah, you want to make sure that you let them know that, like you were saying, it made me a better person, I've come away from this stronger, I'm not feeling, well, maybe you're still a little sad, but I'm not like depressed over it or I'm not able to function. So it's all in the way that you write about it, and you do want to show that you've come out of this stronger as a result. So I think it could be done. It's just all in the way that you present it and write about it. How long should a college essay typically be? This is a good question. So I was talking about the Common Application, which is what most schools will accept. It's really easy to fill out the Common Application, and then you just check the schools that you want to send it off to, and you send it off that way. the one essay that is required for the Common Application has a 500 to 650 word. Well, the 650 words is the maximum, so the word limit is 650. You don't have to write 650 words, but most students will end up writing around 500 to maybe 600 words. And so that's sort of a standard main college essay. And then because it's so easy to submit the Common Application now and just kind of check off the schools that you want to send it to. So I filled in the Common Application, I wrote my essay, I'm going to send it to UT Austin and Baylor and Rice and Stanford. These schools are kind of like, wait a minute, we're not going to make it so easy for you. You have to write an essay about why you want to come to our school. So Stanford, for example, has 3 short essays that you have to answer. They're really short, maybe like 250 words or less or fewer, and then a bunch of short questions, because they want to make sure that you've done the research on their school and that you feel like it's a good fit and that you're not just kind of sending in your applications without really thinking about it. So typical college essay, about 500 to 600 words. There are shorter essays required too, and some short questions that you might have to answer too. So keep that in mind too. But all these tips really work for everything, all of these kinds of essays. So I mentioned the short answers for Stanford. One of the questions is 5 words, write 5 words that describe you. And so we had a student do that and, again, wrote words like hardworking and trustworthy and things that like a lot of other students are going to be writing. Good qualities to have, but again, you want to make sure that you're sounding like your personality is shining through even on those little short questions. So a student went back and wrote like things like pale and quirky, and just things that you wouldn't necessarily think to write, like, no, that's not going to sound impressive enough, but it was really him, and that was his personality. And that student did end up getting into Stanford. So these tips you can use on short questions, on short essays, on the main Common App essay. Really, the tone, the feel of the essays should be similar throughout the application. How can I go about choosing which topic will be great to showcase college admissions officers? So how do I choose the topic, basically? So I spend a lot of time with students brainstorming ideas for stories. And what you want to do is you kind of just want to think about, so you don't want to censor yourself in the beginning. You don't want to be like, no, that's not impressive enough. No, that's not. In the beginning, you just kind of want to be like, let me just, like, what are the things that make me who I am? Let me see. I'll give you an example. I had a student who wanted to write about he really liked Ultimate Frisbee. And so he wanted to write about starting an Ultimate Frisbee club. And which I thought, this could be a good idea. But so tell me about it. Like, what are you thinking to write about? And he said, well, it wasn't easy to start this club. I had to get a sponsor, and then I had to do this and jump through these hoops. And so the reason he was explaining that to me is just to show, like, look at all of the things, the hoops that I had to jump through to get this done. And I said, well, that's great and all, but I feel like, but why did you want to start this? Like, talk to me more about Ultimate Frisbee. We're in Texas, where football is huge. Like, did anyone even want to join your Ultimate Frisbee team? And he was like, oh, no, not really. It was hard for me to convince people to join. So I asked him, like, who's on your Ultimate Frisbee team? And he was like, really? It's like me and like 5 of my friends. And I asked him, like, when do you guys practice? And he said on Friday night. So people don't really come because Friday night is football night, and so that's why there aren't that many people. So I asked him, like, what do you guys do there? Like, obviously you're playing Ultimate Frisbee, but what else do you do? Like, tell me about it. And he starts talking about how, well, I'm really liberal, and Texas is very conservative. My friends are really conservative, and so we'll have debates while we're playing Ultimate Frisbee. Like, we'll talk about this, we'll talk about that. And I was like, that sounds really interesting. So we just went on like that. And in the end, he ends up writing his essay. It's sort of about Ultimate Frisbee, but it's really about like him and his friends playing Ultimate Frisbee and the conversations that they have and the relationships that they have, and how he's sort of kind of a different kind of person than the typical Texan. So when you're brainstorming ideas, So think about, like, let's say you come up with something like, I want to write about starting the Ultimate Frisbee Club. What I like to do is go dig deeper and think about, like, well, why did you start that? Well, why is that interesting to you? Why is that fun? What do you do? Tell me more about that. Tell me, like, break everything down and you'll be surprised. Interesting stories may come out of it. Sometimes stories that you're like, they don't care about what me and my friends are talking about, but like, no, actually they do, because that really tells them a lot about you, how you think, um, what your relationship with other people are, with your friends. So there isn't like a perfect topic or you should do this. It really just takes a lot of reflection. Why did I do this? Why did I start this? Why does that make me happy? Um, think about the details, like with this story. What were your conversations like? What did you guys talk about? And then what did he say? And then what did she say? And then that builds a story. So again, you can do this with like a teacher, you can do this with your guidance counselor, you can do this with your mom or dad if you feel like you're comfortable enough talking to them about things like that. You can just say like, here's my idea, and just like dig deeper into it. Find what that story is that really makes it you. So the last question I have is, does an essay need a strong vocabulary or simple English? So I was talking about how your essay should sound like you. We had one student who wrote his essay, and it was a bit more, well, it was pretty formal. But when talking to the student, that's how the student talked. Like, it really was. And so I'm feeling like, well, it shouldn't be so formal, but this is how the student talks. Like, this is who you are. So in that case, I said, this is you. This sounds like you. This is how it should be. But most students, they'll send an essay to me and I'll say, okay, read this out loud. And they'll read it out loud. And I'm like, would you ever say that out loud? Would you ever talk like that? Would you ever, say it like that to your friend or to your mom or whoever? And they're like, no, I would never say that out loud. Okay, then that doesn't sound like, that's not you. That's not how it should be written. So it should definitely be well written in terms of the grammar and, the mechanics. They should all be there. But you shouldn't feel like you need to use, all of these big words to sound or to show them that you're really smart. It can be written in a more casual tone with not to say like simple words, but yeah, a bit more, toned down and not as formal. I think that would be okay. Even at Harvard, people are like, oh, but everyone was probably writing these, essays that were sort of like English class caliber, but no, the essays, it's like I was talking about the Britney Spears one. The essays that stood out were just the ones where the students were really just being who they were and sounding like themselves. So, do you guys have any other questions? All right. Well, yeah, I just want you guys to know, again, that you can use these tips on short answers, short essays, on the main common application essay, even on the essays that ask you, like, why this college? Why Penn? Why do you want to apply to Penn University? You can even use the tips on those as well. So those need to be personal too. Those can't just be like, I had a student who was applying to Penn and she wanted to be an engineer. And so she wrote, I want to go to Penn because, well, it's one of the top ranked engineering schools and it has, excellent professors and I'd be able to get a good job after I graduated. And it was just so boring. It was a list of like all these things that any student could list. It was really just like, oh my gosh, no, this is awful. You need to go back and rewrite it. So, well, I started talking with her. So I was saying, talk to somebody, like brainstorm through it with somebody. So I was like, tell me about your trip to Penn. And she said, well, she's from Texas too. So she was like, I went, it was snowing. And I remember that I was thinking they're probably going to cancel this tour because it's snowing. And like, that's kind of crazy to have a tour in the snow. But she said, no, they didn't cancel it. They had umbrellas for all of us. And they just gave us our umbrella at the admissions office. And we're like, okay, we're going on our tour. And so she said that her tour guide was a student. And she said the tour guide was just so excited to show them around that she would stop in front of a building and she would put her umbrella down so that she could gesture with her hands because she'd get so excited about, the library or whatever it was. And she said that's something that really stayed with her about the school, where she said, I want to go to a school with students like that who are just so excited about being there. Even when they're just talking about a building, their faces light up. And so I said, those are the kinds of stories that you should be sharing, in those why college essays. It shouldn't just be a list of like top engineering school, top academics, top professors, small classes. It should be more personal too. So even when you're writing those essays, you can use these tips to make it sound like you. Let me see, I just wanted to make sure I'm not missing any last questions. Okay, so thank you guys for stopping by. It's very strange that I can't see your faces, but but anyway, I'm glad to have done this for you. If you'd like to learn more about CollegeWise or what I do, my work with students, you can email me. My email address is on the screen. I do introductory meetings with students where we kind of just talk through things and figure out whether or not it makes sense for us to work together. But otherwise, as I was saying, you can talk through these things with your counselor, with your parents if you feel comfortable, with friends, and just I hope you feel a bit more ready to write the college essays after this. And good luck with everything. And again, just let me know if you have any questions. You can send me an email. Thanks, guys.